Sometimes life pushes a man so far down that he'll take anything thrown his way, even if it seems like another burden. Tom Morrison knew that feeling all too well, as he stared at the letter telling him he'd inherited a mansion nobody wanted. The crumbling Victorian house in Milbrook had been empty for 30 years. Everyone in town called it a money pit with rotting floors and a cracked foundation. Tom had lost his factory job 6 months ago. With his 8-year-old son, Danny, depending on him, he couldn't afford to turn down free housing. He figured he could work nights and weekends to make the old place livable. The mansion's previous owner had left behind more than just peeling wallpaper and broken windows. Tom didn't know he was about to stumble onto something that would change his family's life forever. But would this desperate father's search for a better life lead him to uncover the mystery that had been waiting in those walls for decades? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tom Morrison had always been good with his hands. For 15 years, he'd built custom cabinets and restored old homes throughout the county, taking pride in bringing beauty back to forgotten places. His calloused fingers could read wood grain like others read books, understanding which boards would hold and which needed replacing. But 6 months ago, when Morrison Construction folded along with half the businesses in their small Indiana town, those skilled hands had little left to do except count the dwindling bills. The one-bedroom apartment he shared with Danny felt smaller every day. Boxes of his carpentry tools lined the walls like a museum of better times. Danny's bed was tucked into what should have been the dining area, his homework spread across a card table Tom had bought at a garage sale. The boy never complained, but Tom caught him sometimes staring out their single window at the house across the street, where the Thompson kids had their own rooms and a backyard with an actual swing set. Danny's worn baseball glove sat on the kitchen counter, a constant reminder of promises Tom struggled to keep. The leather was cracking, the webbing loose, but it was the most treasured thing his son owned. Tom had bought it 3 Christmases ago, when work was steady and hope came easy. Now it represented everything Tom wanted to give his boy, but couldn't afford little league fees, decent equipment, the kind of childhood where money wasn't always the silent worry in every conversation. "Dad, are we really going to live in a mansion?" Danny asked from his makeshift bed, his 8-year-old imagination already running wild with possibilities. Tom looked up from the inheritance letter he'd read a dozen times. The legal language was dry, but the message was clear. Henry Blackwood, a great-uncle Tom had never met, had left him a Victorian mansion in Milbrook, along with enough money in an estate account to cover the property taxes for exactly 1 year. After that, Tom would be on his own. It's not really a mansion, buddy, just an old house that needs a lot of work. But Mrs. Patterson said mansions have secret passages and hidden rooms. Danny's eyes lit up the way they used to when Tom would tell him bedtime stories about brave knights and magical kingdoms. Tom smiled despite himself. Danny had overheard their elderly neighbor talking about the Blackwood place when the inheritance letter arrived. Mrs. Patterson had lived in Milbrook her whole life and remembered when the mansion was the grandest house for miles around. She also remembered when it became the town's most infamous eyesore. "We'll see what we find when we get there, son, but don't get your hopes up too high. From what I hear, this place has been empty for 30 years. The drive to Milbrook took 2 hours through rolling farmland and small communities that had seen better days. Danny pressed his face to the passenger window, watching barns and silos drift past like monuments to a simpler time. Tom found himself thinking about his own childhood, growing up in similar country, where neighbors knew each other's names and people still believed in honest work and keeping your word. Milbrook appeared around a bend in the highway, like something from a Norman Rockwell painting, if Rockwell had painted during harder times. The main street held the bones of prosperity, a pharmacy with hand-painted signs, a diner with red vinyl booths visible through plate glass windows, a hardware store with genuine wooden floors that creaked under customers' feet. But half the storefronts were empty, their windows papered with old advertisements and faded "for rent" signs. Tom pulled into Henderson's market to ask for directions. The elderly woman behind the counter had silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that seemed to take measure of a person in one glance. "You must be Henry's great-nephew," she said before Tom could introduce himself. "I'm Margaret Henderson. I live next door to the Blackwood place." Her tone carried the weight of someone delivering both welcome and warning. "Yes, ma'am. Tom Morrison. This is my son, Danny." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened when she looked at the boy. "Well, Danny, I hope you're not afraid of big old houses. The Blackwood mansion is quite a sight." "Are there really secret passages?" Danny asked with the earnestness only children could muster. Mrs. Henderson glanced at Tom, something unreadable passing across her features. "Old houses hold many secrets, child. Some are wonderful discoveries. Others, well, some things are better left undisturbed." The mansion sat on 5 acres at the end of Elm Street, separated from its neighbors by overgrown hedges and a wrought-iron fence that had surrendered to rust and time. Tom's first glimpse made his heart sink and soar simultaneously. The 3-story Victorian was magnificent and tragic, like a grand dame fallen on hard times. The architecture was stunning, bay windows with intricate trim, a wraparound porch supported by carved columns, a tower room that rose above the main structure like a castle turret. But 30 years of neglect had taken their toll. Paint peeled from every surface in great curling sheets. Several windows were boarded up. The porch sagged in the middle, and missing shingles left the roof, looking like a smile with broken teeth. "Wow," Danny breathed, and Tom couldn't tell if it was wonder or disappointment. They walked the perimeter slowly, Tom's carpenter's eye cataloguing the work ahead. The foundation looked solid, built from the kind of stone quarried locally a century ago. The bones of the house were strong. It would be the cosmetic restoration that would test his skills and patience. The front door key had come with the inheritance papers, along with a note explaining that the utilities had been maintained at minimal levels to prevent pipes from freezing. When Tom turned the key and pushed open the heavy oak door, it swung inward with a groan that seemed to echo through empty rooms. The entry hall took his breath away. A grand staircase curved upward, its banister carved from what looked like solid walnut. The floors were wide plank hardwood, dulled by dust and neglect, but showing glimpses of rich honey color beneath the grime. Crown molding ran along 14-foot ceilings, and stained glass panels flanked the front door, casting colored shadows across the space. "Dad, look at this," Danny called from the parlor. He stood beneath a crystal chandelier, its hundreds of prisms catching the afternoon light, streaming through tall windows. Tom joined his son, running his hand along the fireplace mantel. The marble was veined in gray and gold, and the carved details showed the work of master craftsmen. Even in its current state, the room radiated elegance and history. They moved through the house like archaeologists exploring ancient ruins. The dining room could seat 12 easily, its mahogany table still gleaming under a layer of dust. The kitchen retained its original cabinetry, built-in hutches and pantries that spoke of an era when families cooked elaborate meals from scratch. Tom noticed the quality of the woodwork, the attention to detail that marked the difference between houses and homes built to last generations. Upstairs, they found 6 bedrooms, each with its own character. The master suite included a sitting area and private bathroom with a clawfoot tub deep enough for soaking away a day's work. Danny claimed the bedroom in the tower, drawn by its circular walls and windows that looked out over the entire town. "Can this really be ours?" Danny asked, as they stood in what would be his room. Tom put his hand on his son's shoulder, feeling the weight of possibility and responsibility in equal measure. "If we can make it work, buddy, it's going to take everything we've got." As the sun set behind the mansion's towers and gables, Tom found himself standing on the front porch with Danny, both of them quiet in the face of what lay ahead. The house needed everything new wiring, updated plumbing, a complete exterior restoration, and probably a dozen other problems he hadn't discovered yet. But beneath the decay, he could see what this place had been and what it could become again. Mrs. Henderson appeared at the fence, carrying a covered dish that smelled like pot roast and vegetables. "Figured you two might be hungry after your long day," she said, passing the meal through the gate. "And I wanted to give you fair warning. This house has a way of surprising people. Henry Blackwood was an unusual man, and he left things the way he wanted them found." Tom accepted the warm dish gratefully. "What kind of things?" Mrs. Henderson smiled, but there was something cautious in her expression. "Oh, you'll see soon enough. Just remember, Henry was a man who believed in taking care of family, even family he'd never met. He had his reasons for everything, including choosing you." As she walked back to her own house, Tom found himself wondering what she meant. But watching Danny's face glow with excitement as he planned where to put his bed and his books, Tom decided that some mysteries could wait. For tonight, it was enough that they had a home, even if it came with more questions than answers. 3 weeks into their new life, Tom and Danny had established a rhythm. Mornings were for cleanup and assessment, afternoons for the odd carpentry jobs Tom could find in town, and evenings for the slow work of making the mansion livable. They'd managed to get the utilities fully operational and had claimed the 2 bedrooms with the least amount of damage for their temporary quarters. Danny threw himself into the project with the enthusiasm only an 8-year-old could muster. He'd appointed himself chief dust removal specialist and unofficial mansion historian, pestering Mrs. Henderson with questions about the Blackwood family whenever she brought over meals or checked on their progress. It was Danny who made the discovery that changed everything. "Dad, there's something weird about this wall," he called from the main parlor, where he'd been carefully cleaning the wainscoting with a soft cloth. Tom looked up from the window frame he was restoring. "Weird how?" "The wallpaper is coming loose, but there's something behind it. Not just more wall, something else." Tom set down his tools and joined his son at the far wall. Danny had been working methodically, section by section, and had uncovered a spot where the vintage wallpaper had pulled away from the plaster beneath. But instead of revealing more of the wall's original surface, there was a small recess, barely visible in the afternoon light. Tom ran his fingers along the edge, feeling the outline of what appeared to be a deliberate hiding place cut into the wall itself. The recess was about the size of his palm, carefully carved and smoothed. "Should we see what's in there?" Danny asked, his voice hushed with excitement. Tom nodded, working his fingers into the space. His fingertips touched something smooth and cool metal. Carefully, he extracted an ornate brass key, unlike anything he'd seen in the house. The key was heavy, intricately carved with symbols and patterns that seemed to tell a story. The head was shaped like a heart, and tiny engravings covered every surface. "Wow," Danny breathed. "It's like something from a pirate movie." Tom turned the key over in his palm, studying the craftsmanship. Whoever had made this had been an artist as well as a locksmith. The symbols weren't random decorations, they were purposeful, meaningful. Some looked like compass points, others resembled architectural elements he'd seen throughout the house. "Let's see if it fits any of the doors," Danny suggested, already heading toward the front hall. They spent the next hour testing every lock in the house. The key was too ornate for the simple door locks, too large for the small cabinet latches, and the wrong shape entirely for the modern deadbolts that had been added over the years. But Tom noticed something else as they moved through the mansion. The symbols on the key matched details he'd been seeing throughout the house without really registering them. The same compass rose pattern carved into the key appeared in the banister newel post. The interlocking circles were repeated in the dining room's ceiling medallion. The heart shape showed up in the stained glass panels by the front door. "Danny," Tom said slowly, "I think this key is supposed to lead us somewhere, but not to a door to other clues." That evening, after Danny had gone to bed, Tom sat at the kitchen table with the key under a bright lamp, sketching the symbols in a notebook. The more he studied them, the more convinced he became that they formed a map or code. But a map to what? The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Tom was replacing a broken window in the dining room when he heard a car pull up the gravel drive. Through the glass, he saw a black sedan, expensive and out of place in their rural setting. The man who emerged wore a tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase. He was about Tom's age, with silver at his temples and the kind of confident bearing that came from never having to worry about money. He knocked on the front door with authority. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Marcus Sterling, attorney at law. I represent certain interested parties regarding this property." Tom wiped his hands on a rag before shaking Sterling's offered hand. The man's grip was firm, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "What can I do for you, Mr. Sterling? I understand you've recently inherited this property from Henry Blackwood. I wanted to discuss a business proposition that might interest you." They sat in the parlor, Sterling's expensive shoes incongruous against the dust-covered floors. The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Mr. Morrison, I'll be direct. This house is a money pit. The restoration costs alone will run well into 6 figures, and that's assuming you don't discover any major structural issues. I have clients who are interested in purchasing the property for land development." Tom glanced at the papers Sterling had spread on the coffee table. The proposed purchase price was substantial enough to buy a decent house in town and still have money left over for Danny's future. "That's a generous offer," Tom said carefully, "but we just got here. We haven't even had time to fully assess what needs to be done." Sterling's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Morrison, I've been watching this property for years. I know its history, its problems, its potential. Henry Blackwood was well. He was an eccentric man with unusual ideas about family and inheritance. He may have left you this house, but he didn't do you any favors." Something in Sterling's tone set Tom on edge. "What do you mean by that?" "Blackwood had theories about bloodlines, about deserving heirs. He believed in—" Sterling paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Let's just say he believed certain families owed debts to other families. This house was his way of settling scores." Tom thought about Mrs. Henderson's cryptic warnings, about the careful way she spoke about Henry Blackwood's intentions. "Mr. Sterling, are you saying there's more to this inheritance than I know?" Sterling leaned forward, his professional mask slipping slightly. "I'm saying Henry Blackwood was obsessed with the past. He spent decades researching genealogies, tracking bloodlines, trying to right what he considered historical wrongs. He left you this house for reasons that have nothing to do with generosity." Before Tom could respond, Danny's voice called from upstairs. "Dad, you need to see this." Tom excused himself and found Danny in the library, a room they hadn't spent much time exploring. The boy was standing by a built-in bookcase, pointing at something behind the volumes. "I was looking at the old books, and I noticed this one was loose," Danny explained, pulling out a leather-bound volume. Behind it was another small recess, similar to the one where they'd found the key. This hiding spot contained a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. Tom unfolded it carefully, revealing what appeared to be a floor plan of the mansion, but with areas marked that didn't correspond to any rooms he'd seen. The symbols from the key were scattered throughout the drawing, connected by dotted lines that suggested a path through the house. At the bottom, in spidery handwriting, someone had written, "For the rightful heir, when the time comes, to claim what was lost." "Mr. Morrison?" Sterling's voice called from downstairs. "Is everything all right?" Tom quickly refolded the parchment and tucked it into his pocket. "We're fine. Just found some old books." When they returned to the parlor, Sterling was standing by the window, studying the grounds with obvious interest. "Beautiful property," he said. "Perfect for subdivision development. I appreciate your offer, Mr. Sterling, but I'm not ready to sell." Sterling's expression hardened. "Mr. Morrison, I strongly advise you to reconsider. This house has a history of bringing misfortune to its owners. Henry Blackwood disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The family before him lost everything and fled in the middle of the night. Perhaps it would be wise to break that pattern. After Sterling left, Tom sat on the front porch, with the parchment spread across his knees. The drawing was detailed and precise, showing not just the mansion's layout, but also what appeared to be hidden passages and secret rooms. If it was authentic, Henry Blackwood had designed this place as an elaborate puzzle. Mrs. Henderson appeared at the fence, as if she'd been waiting for Sterling to leave. "That man's been sniffing around this place for 20 years, she said without preamble, "ever since Henry disappeared." "Mrs. Henderson, what really happened to Henry Blackwood?" The elderly woman looked at the mansion with something like sadness. "Henry was a good man who made some hard choices. He spent his later years trying to make amends for things that happened long before you were born. He believed in justice, even when it came at personal cost." Sterling said something about debts between families. Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. "The Blackwood and Sterling families have a complicated history. Henry felt responsible for wrongs done by previous generations. He wanted to make things right, but Marcus Sterling, well, he has different ideas about how debts should be paid." That night, after Danny was asleep, Tom studied the parchment by lamplight. The more he examined it, the more convinced he became that the ornate key was meant to unlock not just physical doors, but the secrets of the house itself. The symbols formed a trail, and if he could follow it correctly, he might discover what Henry Blackwood had really left behind. As he traced the dotted path with his finger, Tom realized that his inheritance was more than just a house. It was a challenge, a test, and possibly a gift that could change everything for him and Danny. But it was also something Marcus Sterling wanted very badly, which meant it was likely more valuable than anyone had told him. The ornate key felt warm in his palm as he made his decision. Tomorrow, he and Danny would begin following the trail Henry Blackwood had left for them. Whatever secrets lay hidden in the mansion's walls, they deserved to know the truth. The next morning dawned grey and drizzly, the kind of weather that made the mansion feel more mysterious than welcoming. Tom had slept poorly, his mind churning over Sterling's warnings and the parchment's promise of hidden secrets. But Danny's excitement was infectious as they prepared to follow the trail laid out in Henry Blackwood's drawing. "It's like a real treasure hunt," Danny said, bouncing on his toes as Tom spread the parchment across the kitchen table. "Where do we start?" Tom studied the diagram, comparing it to his growing familiarity with the house's layout. The first symbol, a compass rose, was marked in what appeared to be the library. They'd already found the parchment there, which suggested they were on the right track. The library was a cozy room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a large window that looked out over the overgrown garden. Most of the books were still in place, volumes on history, architecture, and what appeared to be genealogical research. Tom noticed that many of the genealogy books were marked with bookmarks and handwritten notes. Following the parchment's guidance, they focused their search on the fireplace area. The mantel was carved mahogany, matching the library's built-in shelving. Tom ran his hands along the wood, feeling for anything that might be loose or unusual. "Dad, look at this," Danny called from beside the hearth. He'd discovered that one of the decorative tiles around the fireplace opening was slightly raised compared to the others. Tom knelt beside his son and examined the tile. When he pressed it gently, it shifted under his touch. Working carefully, he managed to pry it free, revealing a shallow compartment behind. Inside was a leather photo album, its cover embossed with the same heart symbol from the ornate key. They carried the album to the window seat and opened it together. The first pages contained formal portraits from what appeared to be the 1960s and 70s, a distinguished man with dark hair and kind eyes, sometimes alone, sometimes with a beautiful woman with auburn hair and a gentle smile. "That must be Henry Blackwood," Tom said, studying the man's face for any family resemblance. There was something familiar about the eyes, the set of the jaw. As they turned the pages, the photos became more personal and intimate. Henry and the woman walking through gardens, sharing meals, laughing together on what appeared to be travels across Europe. But Tom noticed something troubling in the later photos. The woman looked sad, and Henry appeared increasingly isolated. The final pages of the album contained pictures of a young boy, perhaps Danny's age, with the same dark hair as Henry and the woman's bright smile. But written beside many of these photos were dates and cryptic annotations in the same spidery handwriting they'd seen on the parchment. Clara's son, one notation read, born September 15, 1972, the future we cannot claim. Another photo showed the boy with what appeared to be different parents, a stern-faced man in a business suit and a woman who was clearly not Clara. The annotation here was more disturbing. Robert's claim, the lie we must live. Tom felt a chill as he began to understand what the photos were telling him. The symbols and numbers scattered throughout the album weren't just decorative, they were part of a code, references to specific locations and dates. Danny, I think these pictures are telling us a story about Henry's family, but it's complicated. They spent the morning decoding the album's mysteries. The symbols matched those on the ornate key and the parchment, creating a clear trail through the house. Each photo was annotated with coordinates that corresponded to rooms and specific locations within the mansion. The pattern that emerged was both romantic and tragic. Henry had clearly been in love with Clara, but she had been married to someone else, someone named Robert, who appeared to be Henry's business partner based on several formal photographs of the two men together. The young boy was the central mystery. The photos suggested he was Clara and Henry's child, but the annotations indicated he'd been raised by Robert as his own son. The final entries in the album were the most heartbreaking photos of Clara's funeral, with Henry standing apart from the other mourners, and pictures of the boy growing up from a distance, as if Henry had been watching over him, but unable to claim him. "Dad, this is really sad," Danny said, studying a photo of Henry alone in what appeared to be this same library. He loved them, but couldn't be with them. Tom nodded, feeling an unexpected connection to the man who'd left him this inheritance. Henry had been trying to protect and provide for a child he couldn't acknowledge publicly, a situation that resonated deeply with Tom's own struggles as a single father. The album's final clue led them to the mansion's tower room, Danny's chosen bedroom. According to the parchment, they needed to find the next symbol, an interlocking circle pattern somewhere in that circular space. The tower room was unique in the house, with windows facing all directions and a domed ceiling painted with stars and constellations. Danny had already moved his few belongings in, and his baseball glove sat on the window seat like a talisman of normalcy in their increasingly mysterious adventure. Tom studied the star map on the ceiling, wondering if it held any significance. The constellations were accurately portrayed, but certain stars were painted in gold, while others remained silver. Following the pattern, the golden stars formed the same interlocking circles they were seeking. "It's Orion," Danny said, following Tom's gaze. "We learned about it in school. The golden stars are showing us something different about the constellation." Tom realized his son was right. The golden stars, when connected, formed the circle pattern from their clues, and they all pointed toward a specific section of the room's curved wall. The wall section that drew their attention was covered by a large tapestry depicting a medieval hunting scene. When Tom moved the tapestry aside, he found that this section of the wall was slightly different from the rest. The stones were arranged in a subtle pattern that matched the interlocking circles. Working together, they discovered that one of the stones could be pressed inward. When Tom applied pressure, they heard a soft click, and a section of the wall swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow staircase that spiraled upward into darkness. "A secret passage," Danny whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. Tom peered up the staircase, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. The steps were carved stone, worn smooth by age but still solid. A cool breeze drifted down from above, suggesting the passage led to another room, or perhaps even outside. "Should we explore it?" Danny asked. Tom checked his watch. They had a few hours before he needed to head into town for a roofing job he'd picked up. The extra income was critical. The mansion might be free, But utilities, food, and basic supplies were steadily draining his savings. "Let's see where it goes," Tom decided. "But we stay together, and if it seems unsafe, we turn back." They climbed the narrow staircase slowly, Tom's phone flashlight illuminating the way. The passage was clearly original to the house. The stonework was masterful, and small alcoves were carved into the walls at regular intervals, probably meant to hold candles or oil lamps. The staircase ended at a heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands and fitted with an elaborate lock that looked like it would match their ornate key perfectly. Tom inserted the key and turned it slowly. The lock mechanism was well maintained despite its age, and the door opened smoothly to reveal a room that took his breath away. They had found Henry Blackwood's private study, a circular chamber that must have been built into the mansion's highest tower. The room was untouched by time, as if Henry had just stepped out moments ago. A massive desk dominated the center, covered with papers, books, and what appeared to be research materials. Built-in bookshelves lined the walls, and large windows provided a commanding view of the surrounding countryside. But it was the contents of the room that made Tom's heart race. This wasn't just a study, it was a command center for some kind of long-term project. The walls were covered with family trees, genealogical charts, maps, and what appeared to be financial documents dating back decades. At the center of it all was a portrait of Clara, larger and more detailed than any of the photos in the album. She was beautiful, but there was a sadness in her painted eyes that spoke of difficult choices and sacrifices. Danny moved to the desk while Tom examined the wall displays. "Dad, there's a journal here. It looks like someone was writing in it recently." Tom joined his son at the desk. The journal was bound in the same leather as the photo album, and the handwriting was definitely Henry's. The final entry was dated just months before Henry's disappearance. "The boy is grown now," the entry read. "He has a son of his own, struggling as I once struggled, as his father before him struggled. The sterling debts must be paid, but not as Marcus believes. Justice requires restoration, not revenge. The treasure I've hidden will find its way to the rightful heir when the time comes. Clara's legacy will live on through her grandson, even if he never knows her name." Tom's hands trembled as he read the words. Henry had been writing about him, about Danny. Somehow, this mysterious great-uncle had known about their situation and had planned this inheritance as something more than simple family generosity. As he looked around the study with new understanding, Tom realized that their treasure hunt was just beginning. Henry had left them clues not just to hidden wealth, but to a family history they'd never known they possessed. And somewhere in this house, a fortune waited to be claimed if they could solve the puzzles Henry had left behind. Tom spent the rest of that day reading Henry's journal, while Danny explored the secret study with the wonder of a child discovering buried treasure. The journal revealed a complex story of love, betrayal, and redemption that stretched back nearly 60 years. Henry Blackwood had been a successful industrialist in the 1960s, partnering with Robert Sterling in a series of manufacturing ventures that made both men wealthy. But Henry had fallen in love with Robert's wife, Clara, and she with him. Their affair had produced a son, but Clara refused to leave her marriage, partly out of loyalty and partly to protect the child from scandal. The situation had deteriorated when Robert discovered the truth. Instead of confronting Henry directly, he had systematically destroyed their business partnership, using his knowledge of the affair as leverage to force Henry out of deals and steal contracts. By the time Henry realized what was happening, Robert had gained control of most of their shared assets, leaving Henry financially ruined and emotionally devastated. Clara had died in a car accident when her son was only 5 years old, and Robert had remarried quickly, moving away with the boy and erasing any trace of Clara's memory. Henry spent the rest of his life trying to track down his son, eventually discovering that the boy had grown up believing Robert was his father and Clara was merely a stepmother who had died young. But Henry's greatest discovery came near the end of his life, when he learned that his son had married and had a child of his own, Danny. The journal entries from Henry's final years showed a man obsessed with making amends for the past, determined to provide for the grandson he would never meet. "I cannot undo the damage Robert Sterling inflicted," Henry had written, "but I can ensure that Clara's bloodline inherits what was stolen from us. The boy Tom struggles as I once struggled. The cycle must be broken." The journal also revealed the location of the next clue in Henry's elaborate treasure hunt. An antique compass, hidden in the mansion's wine cellar, would point not to magnetic north, but to specific locations within the house, where Henry had concealed evidence of the fortune he'd accumulated in secret over the decades. Finding the wine cellar required following another set of clues from the study. Henry had drawn detailed diagrams of the mansion's hidden passages and secret rooms, revealing that the house had been designed as much for concealment as for comfort. The compass was hidden behind a false wall in the cellar, accessible only through a passage that began in the mansion's pantry. Danny proved invaluable as they navigated the narrow passages. His smaller size allowed him to crawl through spaces that would have been difficult for Tom, and his enthusiasm kept their spirits up when the claustrophobic tunnels became overwhelming. The wine cellar was a masterpiece of stonework, with arched ceilings and racks that had once held hundreds of bottles. Now it was empty except for dust and the faint smell of wine that had long since evaporated. But hidden in an alcove behind the wine racks, they found Henry's compass. The antique instrument was beautiful, its brass case engraved with the same symbols they'd been following throughout the house. But when Tom held it level, the needle didn't point north. It swung toward the mansion's foundation wall with unwavering certainty. "It's not broken," Tom realized. "It's been modified to point to something specific." Following the compass led them to a section of the cellar wall that looked identical to all the others. But careful examination revealed that several stones could be removed, and behind them was another hiding place. This one contained a collection of love letters, tied with a faded ribbon and preserved in an oiled leather pouch. The letters were from Clara to Henry, written over the course of their affair and hidden away after her death. They painted a picture of a woman torn between duty and desire, deeply in love, but unwilling to abandon her responsibilities. "My dearest Henry," one letter began, "I know our love brings pain to everyone we care about, but I cannot help believing that some connections transcend the rules society imposes upon us. Our son will never know his true father, but perhaps someday he will understand that he was conceived in love, not convenience." Another letter, written shortly before Clara's death, contained a revelation that stunned Tom. "I have spoken with my lawyer about my will. If anything happens to me, there is a small fund set aside for our son's future. Robert must never know about it. The account information is hidden, where only someone who truly understands our story would think to look." The compass pointed them to yet another location, this time in the mansion's formal dining room. There, behind a portrait of the house's original builder, they discovered a safe hidden in the wall. The combination was Clara's birthday, which they'd learned from the photo album. Inside the safe were financial documents dating back 40 years, showing that Clara had indeed established a secret trust fund for her son. But more importantly, they found evidence that Henry had been systematically moving his assets into hidden accounts and investments, building a fortune that existed completely outside the business empire Robert Sterling had stolen from him. The documents painted a picture of a man who had spent decades planning for this moment. Henry had liquidated his remaining visible assets in the years before his disappearance, converting everything into gold, cash, and untraceable investments. The total value was staggering, nearly $200 million, accumulated over 30 years of careful planning and patient investing. But the real revelation came in Henry's final letter to his unknown heir, sealed in an envelope marked, "For Clara's grandson, Tom." the letter began, and seeing his name in Henry's handwriting sent chills down Tom's spine. If you are reading this, then my plan has worked, and you have proven yourself worthy of Clara's legacy. You have followed the clues I left because you understand the value of persistence and the importance of family, even family you have never known. The letter went on to explain that the treasure hunt was more than just a puzzle, it was a test of character. Henry had designed the clues to require patience, intelligence, and most importantly, the kind of father's love that would persist even when the task seemed impossible. You have spent these weeks working to provide for your son while solving my riddles, Henry wrote. This tells me that you are the man Clara would want her grandson to be. The fortune I leave you comes with only one condition, that you remember where it came from and why it exists. Robert Sterling stole from our family through treachery and betrayal. I do not ask you to seek revenge, but I do ask that you protect what is yours from those who would take it through similar means. The letter's final paragraphs contained warnings about Marcus Sterling, Robert's son, who had inherited both his father's business empire and his obsession with the Blackwood fortune. Marcus had been searching for Henry's hidden assets for decades, believing they were rightfully his as compensation for his father's damaged reputation. Marcus Sterling is dangerous because he believes his own lies, Henry warned. He has convinced himself that I cheated his father, when the truth is exactly the opposite. He will not give up easily when he learns you have found what he has been seeking. Be careful, and trust only those who knew Clara's true story. As Tom finished reading the letter, the weight of his inheritance became clear. This wasn't just about money, it was about justice, delayed but not denied, about protecting a legacy for future generations, and about standing up to those who believed power gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. The compass had one more destination to reveal, pointing toward the mansion's foundation in a section they hadn't explored. Tom realized that Henry's greatest secret was still waiting to be discovered, hidden somewhere beneath the house itself. But as they prepared to follow the compass to its final destination, Tom heard car doors slamming in the driveway. Through the cellar's small windows, he could see multiple vehicles, Marcus Sterling's black sedan and what appeared to be a sheriff's car. "Dad," Danny whispered, "are we in trouble?" Tom gathered the letters and documents quickly, his mind racing. They had found evidence of a fortune that could change their lives forever, but they hadn't yet located the fortune itself. And now Marcus Sterling was at their door, probably with legal papers and official support. "No, buddy, we're not in trouble," Tom said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "But I think our treasure hunt just got a lot more complicated." Tom and Danny emerged from the cellar through the pantry passage, just as heavy knocking echoed through the mansion. Tom quickly secured the documents in Henry's study, making sure the secret passage was properly hidden before answering the door. Marcus Sterling stood on the front porch with Sheriff Williams, a man Tom recognized from his trips to town. Sterling's expression was grim, and he carried a thick folder of legal documents. "Mr. Morrison," Sterling said without preamble, "I have a court order to inspect this property for evidence of stolen assets." Sheriff Williams looked uncomfortable, but handed Tom the official papers. "Sorry about this, Tom. Mr. Sterling here claims there's property in this house that legally belongs to his family estate." Tom scanned the documents, his heart sinking. Sterling had somehow obtained a search warrant based on claims that Henry Blackwood had embezzled funds from the Sterling family business decades ago. The warrant gave Sterling the right to examine the mansion for any evidence of hidden assets. "Mr. Sterling," Tom said carefully, "I inherited this house legally. I have all the paperwork." "The house, yes," Sterling interrupted, "but not necessarily everything in it. My father kept meticulous records of his business dealings with Henry Blackwood. I have evidence that Blackwood stole nearly $50 million from their partnership before disappearing." Danny stayed close to Tom's side as the men entered the mansion. Tom could see his son was frightened by the official nature of the visit, but also confused about why their treasure hunt had suddenly become a legal matter. Sterling moved through the house with obvious familiarity, examining rooms and checking behind furniture as if he'd been there before. Tom realized that the lawyer had probably been watching the property for years, waiting for an opportunity like this. "Sheriff Williams," Tom said, "how exactly does this work? Do I have any rights here?" The sheriff nodded sympathetically. "You have the right to observe the search and to have any seized property documented. But if they find evidence of stolen assets, those items would need to be held pending a court hearing." Sterling was particularly interested in the library and dining room, the areas where Tom and Danny had made their most significant discoveries. He examined the fireplace where they'd found the photo album and spent considerable time studying the portrait that had hidden Clara's safe. "Mr. Morrison," Sterling said as he worked, "I want you to understand something. Henry Blackwood was a master manipulator. He convinced my father to trust him, then systematically looted their shared assets. When my father discovered the theft, Blackwood disappeared rather than face justice." Tom thought about Henry's journal and the very different story it told. According to Henry's account, Robert Sterling had been the one who used treachery and blackmail to steal their business empire. But Tom couldn't reveal that knowledge without exposing their discoveries. The search continued for 2 hours, with Sterling growing increasingly frustrated as he failed to find what he was looking for. Tom watched nervously as the lawyer examined the areas near their hidden passages, but Sterling seemed unaware of the mansion's secret architecture. "There has to be something here," Sterling muttered, running his hands along the dining room walls. 40 years of planning, and he just disappears? No one hides that successfully without leaving traces. Sheriff Williams was examining the paperwork. Tom had shown him the inheritance documents and property transfer. "Mr. Sterling, everything here looks legitimate. Mr. Morrison inherited this property through proper legal channels." "The property, yes," Sterling repeated. "But Blackwood was paranoid about banks and government oversight. He converted everything to physical assets, gold, cash, artwork, items that could be hidden and moved without leaving paper trails." Tom felt a chill as he realized how much Sterling knew about Henry's methods. The lawyer had clearly been researching this for decades, building a case and waiting for the right moment to act. As the afternoon wore on, Sterling's search became more invasive. He examined the kitchen pantry, where their secret passage began, though he didn't discover the hidden entrance. He spent significant time in the tower room, studying the star map on the ceiling and moving furniture to check the walls. "Daddy," Danny whispered when Sterling was distracted, "should we tell them about the secret rooms?" Tom shook his head slightly. Something about Sterling's intensity and obvious desperation made him reluctant to reveal their discoveries. Henry's warnings about trusting only those who knew Clara's true story echoed in his mind. The search finally ended when Sterling ran out of areas to examine. He stood in the mansion's front hall, clearly frustrated, but trying to maintain his professional demeanor. "Mr. Morrison, I want to make you an offer," he said. "I'm prepared to double my previous purchase price for this property, $2 million, cash, with a quick closing." Tom felt Danny's surprised intake of breath. $2 million was more money than they'd ever dreamed of having. It would solve every financial problem they'd ever faced and provide security for Danny's entire future. "That's very generous," Tom said slowly, "but I'm still not ready to sell." Sterling's mask slipped slightly, revealing the anger beneath his polished exterior. "Mr. Morrison, you're making a mistake. This house will bankrupt you. The restoration costs alone will exceed anything you could ever afford on a carpenter's salary. And there are other considerations: historical preservation societies, environmental impact studies, zoning challenges. I can make those problems disappear, but only if we work together." The threat was subtle but clear. Sterling had the resources and connections to make Tom's life difficult if he refused to cooperate. Sheriff Williams seemed to sense the tension. "Gentlemen, I think we've done what we came to do. Mr. Sterling, You've conducted your search. Mr. Morrison, you've been cooperative. Unless there's evidence of actual wrongdoing, I think we should call this matter closed for now." After Sterling and the sheriff left, Tom and Danny sat on the front porch in the gathering dusk. The evening air was cool, and the mansion's windows glowed warmly in the fading light. "Dad, are we going to sell the house?" Danny asked. Tom pulled his son closer, feeling the weight of the decision before them. $2 million would indeed solve their immediate problems, but it would also mean abandoning the mystery they'd been unraveling and potentially allowing Sterling to claim Henry's hidden fortune. "I don't think so, buddy. This house is our home now, and I think Henry left us something important to find." That night, after Danny was asleep, Tom returned to Henry's study to continue reading the journal. The later entries revealed more about Marcus Sterling's character and the lengths he'd gone to in searching for the Blackwood fortune. "Marcus has inherited his father's sense of entitlement," Henry had written. "He believes that wealth should flow to those born to privilege, regardless of how it was originally obtained. He will never understand that true justice requires acknowledging past wrongs, not perpetuating them." The journal also contained warnings about Sterling's methods. Over the years, Marcus had used legal harassment, financial pressure, and political connections to force previous owners of properties he believed contained Blackwood assets to sell to him. The mansion had changed hands 3 times since Henry's disappearance, and each time Sterling had been the ultimate beneficiary. He creates problems for ordinary people, then offers to solve those problems in exchange for what he wants, Henry had noted. "It is a refined form of extortion, dressed in legal language and justified by invented grievances." Tom realized that Sterling's offer to help with zoning and preservation issues wasn't generosity, it was a threat. The lawyer was probably already working behind the scenes to create the very problems he'd mentioned. But Henry's journal also revealed something that gave Tom hope. Hidden in the mansion's foundation was not just a fortune, but a complete archive of documents proving Robert Sterling's theft of the Blackwood business empire. Henry had spent years collecting evidence, building a case that would vindicate his reputation and expose the Sterling family's true history. "The truth has waited 60 years to be told," Henry had written. "When the right person finds these documents, the Sterling lies will finally be exposed." The compass was pointing them toward that final cache, hidden somewhere beneath the mansion in what Henry called the heart of the house. But accessing it would require solving one last puzzle, and Tom suspected they were running out of time before Sterling made his next move. The next few days brought a series of seemingly unrelated problems that Tom quickly recognized as Sterling's handiwork. First, the county building inspector arrived unannounced, citing complaints about potential code violations in the mansion's electrical system. Then came a letter from the state environmental agency demanding soil tests for possible contamination. Finally, the local Historical Preservation Society contacted Tom about placing the mansion under a restrictive designation that would severely limit any renovation work. Each issue required time Tom didn't have and money he couldn't afford. The building inspector wanted $3,000 in electrical upgrades before he'd approve their occupancy permit. The environmental testing would cost another $2,000. The historical designation process required legal representation that could run into the tens of thousands. "It's like someone is trying to force us out," Danny observed with the clarity that sometimes comes from a child's perspective. Tom nodded grimly. Sterling was orchestrating a campaign of bureaucratic harassment designed to make keeping the mansion financially impossible. But giving up now would mean abandoning not just their home, but the truth Henry had preserved for them to discover. Mrs. Henderson proved to be an unexpected ally in their struggle. She arrived one morning with coffee and homemade muffins, but also with information about Sterling's tactics. "He did the same thing to the Washingtons when they owned this place in the 90s, she explained, settling into a chair in the mansion's restored kitchen. "Created one problem after another until they couldn't afford to fight anymore. Then he swooped in with a generous offer to buy them out. "How do you know all this?" Tom asked. Mrs. Henderson smiled, and Tom caught a glimpse of the sharp intelligence behind her grandmotherly exterior. "Tom, I've lived next door to this house for 40 years. I've seen 3 families driven out by Marcus Sterling's games. I also knew Henry Blackwood well enough to understand what he was planning." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue paper. When she unwrapped it, Tom saw a locket, the same one they'd found in the wine cellar, or one exactly like it. "Henry gave this to me before he disappeared, Mrs. Henderson said. "He told me that someday Clara's grandson would come to claim his inheritance, and when that happened, I was to help however I could." Tom stared at the locket, then at Mrs. Henderson. "You knew? You knew about me and Danny?" "I suspected when you first arrived. You have Clara's eyes, and Danny has Henry's stubborn chin. But I became certain when I saw how you approached the house, not as someone looking to profit from it, but as someone trying to build a home." The locket contained a tiny scroll, much like the one from their earlier discovery. But this scroll was different. It was a map of the mansion's foundation, showing the location of what Henry called the Vault of Truth. "Henry spent his final years preparing for this moment," Mrs. Henderson explained. "He knew Sterling would never stop searching, never accept that the fortune was beyond his reach. So Henry designed a test only someone who truly understood Clara's story and cared about family would be able to find what he hid." The map showed that the vault was accessible through the mansion's basement, but not through any conventional entrance. Instead, it required following a specific sequence of hidden passages and solving a mechanical puzzle that Henry had built into the house's foundation. "The puzzle requires 2 people, Mrs. Henderson noted, pointing to the diagram. "Henry designed it so that a parent and child working together could solve it, but a single person, no matter how clever, could not." Tom realized this was why Danny had been so important to their quest. Henry hadn't just left clues for his heir to follow. He'd created challenges that could only be overcome by the kind of teamwork that came from genuine family bonds. But their planning was interrupted by another crisis. Tom returned from a job interview in town to find Danny waiting on the front porch with tears in his eyes. "Dad, there were men here looking for you. They said we have to leave." Tom's heart sank as he read the eviction notice they'd posted on the front door. Sterling had somehow obtained a court order claiming that Tom's occupancy of the mansion violated the terms of Henry's will. According to the document, Tom had 30 days to vacate the property or face forcible removal. Mrs. Henderson examined the papers with the expertise of someone who'd seen similar documents before. "This is nonsense," she said firmly. "Henry's will was perfectly clear, and I have copies of all the original documents. But Sterling knows that fighting this in court will cost more than you can afford." That evening, as Tom tucked Danny into bed in the tower room they'd both grown to love, his son asked the question Tom had been dreading. "Are we going to have to move again?" Tom looked around the circular room with its star-painted ceiling and tall windows overlooking the countryside. Danny had finally found a place where he felt safe and happy, where he could have adventures and help solve mysteries. The thought of taking that away from him was almost unbearable. "Not if I can help it, buddy. We're going to find what Henry left for us, and then we're going to fight for our right to stay here. Even if it's scary?" Tom smiled, remembering his own father's words from years ago. "Especially when it's scary, that's when fighting matters most." The next morning brought new resolve. Tom and Danny, with Mrs. Henderson's help, began the final phase of their treasure hunt. Using the foundation map and Henry's compass, they located the entrance to the deepest part of the mansion's hidden passage system. The entrance was concealed behind what appeared to be a solid stone wall in the basement's far corner. But when Tom pressed the correct sequence of stones following coordinates from Clara's locket, a section of the wall pivoted inward, revealing a tunnel that led deeper underground than any of the previous passages. This tunnel was different from the others. The walls were lined with the same quality stonework as the mansion's foundation, but the passage was wider and the ceiling higher. Electric lights had been installed at some point, controlled by an old-fashioned switch near the entrance. The tunnel led to a circular chamber carved directly from the bedrock beneath the mansion. At the center of the chamber stood an ornate chess piece, a knight, carved from what appeared to be solid marble. The knight was mounted on a pedestal that clearly served as some kind of control mechanism. According to Henry's notes, the chess piece was the key to the final puzzle. But solving it required understanding the love story that had driven Henry to create this elaborate treasure hunt in the first place. Tom studied the chamber walls, which were covered with carved symbols and quotations. Many were from famous love poems, but others appeared to be personal messages between Henry and Clara. At the center of it all was a quote that seemed to sum up Henry's philosophy. "True love endures beyond death, beyond lies, beyond the schemes of small men who mistake wealth for worth." The chess knight could be rotated and moved up and down on its pedestal. Tom realized that the correct combination would be based on significant dates and coordinates from Henry and Clara's story: their first meeting, their son's birth, Clara's death, and perhaps most importantly, the moment Henry decided to preserve their legacy for future generations. With Danny's help, Tom began working through the possibilities, using everything they'd learned about Henry and Clara's relationship. Each correct input was rewarded with a mechanical click from somewhere within the chamber walls. Each mistake reset the entire sequence, forcing them to start over. As they worked, Tom found himself thinking about the parallels between Henry's story and his own. Both men had been fathers, trying to provide for children in difficult circumstances. Both had faced powerful enemies who used wealth and influence to take what didn't belong to them. And both had discovered that the most important treasures couldn't be bought or stolen. They had to be earned through love, sacrifice, and determination. The final click echoed through the chamber with a finality that made both Tom and Danny hold their breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a section of the chamber floor began to rise, revealing a vault that had been hidden beneath their feet. The vault that rose from the chamber floor was unlike anything Tom had imagined. It wasn't just a hiding place for treasure, it was a time capsule, a complete archive of Henry Blackwood's life and the evidence he'd spent decades collecting. The vault's interior was lined with climate-controlled cases containing documents, photographs, audio recordings, and physical artifacts. But most stunning of all was the collection of legal papers in fireproof filing cabinets, contracts, correspondence, financial records, and sworn statements that told the true story of the Blackwood-Sterling partnership. Tom and Danny spent hours examining the contents, but it was a particular file labeled Sterling Bank Documents that changed everything they thought they knew about their situation. The file contained photocopies of bank records, showing that Robert Sterling hadn't just stolen from Henry, he'd embezzled funds from dozens of other business partners over a 30-year period. Sterling had used a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts to hide his crimes, always ensuring that other people took the blame when his schemes were discovered. But the most shocking revelation came in the form of a recorded confession. Henry had apparently confronted Robert Sterling shortly before his own disappearance, and he'd secretly recorded their conversation. The audio quality was poor, but Sterling's voice was clearly audible as he bragged about his methods. "You think you're so clever, Henry?" Sterling's voice crackled from the old recording equipment. "But I've been playing this game longer than you. Every partnership, every deal, every trust fund, I take what I want and leave others holding the responsibility. It's not theft if you're smart enough not to get caught." The recording went on to detail specific crimes, including Sterling's plan to frame Henry for embezzlement and disappear with both their accumulated wealth. What Sterling hadn't known was that Henry had already moved his assets to secure locations, preparing for exactly this betrayal. But the file's final document was what made Tom's hands tremble as he read it. It was a copy of a police report from 1992 2 years after Henry's disappearance, describing the suspicious death of Robert Sterling in what appeared to be a boating accident. According to the report, Sterling had been alone on his yacht when it exploded and sank. His body was never recovered, but investigators found evidence suggesting the explosion wasn't accidental. The case remained unsolved, but the report noted that Sterling had recently discovered significant financial irregularities in his business accounts. Tom realized that Robert Sterling had likely been killed by one of his own victims, someone who'd finally uncovered his crimes and decided to take justice into their own hands. Henry's archive contained evidence that several of Sterling's former partners had lost everything to his schemes, including one man who'd committed suicide after being falsely accused of embezzlement. "Dad," Danny said quietly, "if Robert Sterling is dead, why is his son still trying to take our house?" It was a good question, and the answer came in the final section of Henry's archive. Marcus Sterling didn't just believe his father's lies about Henry Blackwood, he'd inherited his father's criminal methods and sense of entitlement. The younger Sterling had spent his career using legal harassment and financial manipulation to claim assets he believed were rightfully his, never realizing that his father had been a thief and a murderer. But the archive contained something even more valuable than evidence of past crimes. Hidden in the vault's deepest recess was a metal briefcase containing bearer bonds, gold coins, and cash totaling nearly $200 million. This was Henry's true legacy wealth accumulated legally over decades of careful investing, preserved for the family he'd never been able to claim publicly. Tom stared at the fortune that could solve every problem they'd ever faced, but he also understood the responsibility that came with it. Henry hadn't just left them money, he'd left them the truth, and the obligation to ensure that truth was finally revealed. As they prepared to leave the vault with their discoveries, they heard voices echoing through the tunnel above. Someone had found the hidden entrance and was making their way toward the chamber. Tom quickly gathered the most important documents and as much of the portable wealth as he could carry. But as footsteps approached the chamber entrance, he realized they were trapped. The vault's mechanical entrance had closed automatically, and there was no other exit from the underground chamber. Marcus Sterling appeared at the tunnel entrance, flanked by two men who looked more like security guards than lawyers. Sterling's usual professional demeanor was gone, replaced by the desperate intensity of someone who'd spent his entire life searching for something that had always been just out of reach. "Mr. Morrison," Sterling said, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. "I thought I might find you down here. You've been busy." Tom stepped protectively in front of Danny, the briefcase of bearer bonds hidden behind him. "Mr. Sterling, you're trespassing on private property." Sterling laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Private property? Tom, this house should have been mine 40 years ago. Henry Blackwood stole everything my family built, and then he disappeared before we could recover what he took." "That's not what happened," Tom said, thinking of the recorded confession and the evidence in Henry's archive. "Your father was the thief, and you know it." Sterling's expression darkened. "My father was a successful businessman who trusted the wrong partner. Henry Blackwood was a criminal who used charm and manipulation to steal from people who considered him a friend." Tom realized that Sterling genuinely believed his own version of events. 40 years of living with his father's lies had twisted the truth into something unrecognizable. Sterling wasn't just greedy, he was delusional, convinced that his family's crimes were actually virtues and that everyone else was conspiring against him. "Mr. Sterling," Tom said carefully, "I have evidence that proves Henry was innocent. Documents, recordings, financial records that show exactly what your father did." "Evidence?" Sterling's voice rose dangerously. "Evidence planted by a master manipulator to make himself look innocent? Tom, you're being used, just like everyone else who trusted Henry Blackwood." One of Sterling's companions moved closer, and Tom noticed the man's hand resting on what appeared to be a weapon concealed beneath his jacket. These weren't lawyers or investigators, they were enforcers, the kind of people who solved problems through intimidation and violence. "Dad," Danny whispered, pressing close to Tom's side. "I'm scared." Tom felt a surge of protective rage. Sterling's obsession with the past was threatening to destroy the future Tom was trying to build for his son. Whatever Henry had hidden in this chamber, it wasn't worth Danny's safety. "What do you want, Sterling?" Tom asked. Sterling smiled, and Tom saw his father's ruthless calculation in the expression. "I want what's mine. Everything Henry stole, everything he hid, everything he thought he could keep from its rightful owners. And I want you and your son to disappear, just like Henry did." The threat was clear and immediate. Sterling wasn't just trying to claim the Blackwood fortune, he was prepared to eliminate anyone who stood in his way, including an 8-year-old boy whose only crime was inheriting the wrong great-uncle's secrets. Tom realized that their treasure hunt had been leading to this moment all along. Henry hadn't just hidden a fortune, he'd set a trap for the Sterling family, ensuring that their final confrontation would take place on ground of his choosing, surrounded by evidence of their crimes. But Henry couldn't have predicted that the confrontation would involve an innocent child. As Sterling's men moved to block the tunnel exit, Tom understood that solving Henry's puzzles had been the easy part. The real test was just beginning. Tom's mind raced as he assessed their situation. Sterling and his men controlled the only exit, but Tom had one advantage. He understood the chamber's hidden mechanisms, while Sterling was operating blind. The chess knight that had opened the vault was still active, and Tom remembered seeing other symbols around the chamber that might trigger additional functions. "Sterling," Tom said, buying time while he studied the chamber walls, "before you do something you'll regret, you should know that other people are aware of what we found down here." Sterling raised an eyebrow. "Really? Who exactly knows about your little treasure hunt?" "Mrs. Henderson, for one. She's been helping us, and she knows we came down here today. If something happens to us, she'll call the authorities." "Margaret Henderson," Sterling said with disdain. "That old woman has been a thorn in my side for decades. She's the one who's been feeding you information about my family's business." Tom realized that Sterling's hatred ran deeper than just the Blackwood fortune. Mrs. Henderson represented everyone who'd witnessed his father's crimes and refused to accept the Sterling family's version of history. "She knows the truth about your father," Tom said, "just like Henry did. That's why you're really here, not for money, but to bury the evidence that would destroy your family's reputation." Sterling's mask slipped completely, revealing the rage beneath his polished exterior. "My father built an empire through hard work and intelligence. He created jobs, supported communities, contributed to charities. Henry Blackwood was a parasite who destroyed everything he touched." "Your father was a thief and a murderer," Tom said, thinking of the recorded confession and the suspicious circumstances surrounding Robert Sterling's death. "And you've spent your life covering up his crimes." One of Sterling's men stepped forward, clearly impatient with the conversation. "Boss, we should wrap this up. The longer we stay down here, the more complicated this gets." Sterling nodded, but Tom caught a subtle movement from Danny. His son had noticed something. Tom had missed a small alcove in the chamber wall that contained what appeared to be an emergency communication system. Henry had built the chamber with multiple safeguards, including a way to call for help if something went wrong. Tom needed to create a distraction to give Danny a chance to reach the communication device. But he also needed to protect the evidence they'd discovered and ensure that Sterling's crimes were finally exposed. "You know what I think happened, Sterling?" Tom said, moving slightly to draw attention away from Danny's position. "I think your father discovered that Henry had evidence of his embezzlement. So he tried to kill Henry and make it look like an accident, just like what happened to him 2 years later." Sterling's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You don't know what you're talking about." "But Henry was too smart for your father. He hid the evidence and disappeared, leaving your father to wonder for the rest of his short life whether someone would expose his crimes. And eventually, someone did." "My father died in a boating accident," Sterling said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Your father was murdered by one of his victims," Tom pressed on. Someone who'd lost everything to his schemes and decided to take justice into their own hands. The police report is right here in Henry's files. Danny had reached the alcove and was examining the communication device. Tom could see his son's lips moving silently as he read the instructions Henry had left for emergency situations. Sterling was becoming increasingly agitated, pacing the small space like a caged animal. Even if that were true, it doesn't change anything. My family's assets were stolen, and I have every right to recover them. What assets? Tom challenged. Everything your father accumulated came from theft and embezzlement. Henry's fortune was earned honestly, through legitimate investments and careful planning. You have no claim to any of it. I have the only claim that matters, Sterling snarled. Power, influence, the ability to take what I want and destroy anyone who tries to stop me. Tom realized that reasoning with Sterling was impossible. The man had inherited his father's pathological sense of entitlement and would never accept that his family's wealth had been built on crime. But Danny had activated something in the alcove. Tom could hear a faint humming sound that suggested electronic equipment was powering up. Sterling noticed the sound too and spun toward Danny's position. What did you do? I called for help, Danny said, with the simple honesty of a child. Like Great-Uncle Henry's instructions, said to do if bad people came to the treasure room. Sterling's face went white with rage. You little... He started toward Danny, but Tom intercepted him, placing himself between Sterling and his son. Don't even think about it. Dad, it worked, Danny called excitedly. The police are coming, and Mrs. Henderson too. Tom heard the communication device crackling to life, broadcasting their emergency signal to multiple receivers. Henry had designed the system to alert not just local authorities, but also federal agencies that would be interested in the evidence of financial crimes hidden in the chamber. Sterling's men were getting nervous, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of law enforcement involvement. Boss, maybe we should get out of here. No, Sterling said firmly. We've come too far to quit now. If we leave empty-handed, we'll never get another chance. He turned to Tom with desperate intensity. Morrison, I'm prepared to make you a deal. Give me the bearer bonds and the most damaging documents, and I'll let you keep the house and enough money to live comfortably. Everyone wins. Tom almost laughed at the offer. Sterling was so focused on covering up his family's crimes that he still didn't understand the true value of what Henry had left behind. The money was important, but the evidence was priceless. It would vindicate Henry's memory and expose decades of Sterling family corruption. No deal, Tom said. This ends here, today. Your family's crimes are going to be exposed, and justice is finally going to be served. Sterling's composure cracked completely. Justice? You want to talk about justice? My father worked for everything he had, while Henry Blackwood seduced other men's wives and stole from his business partners. Where's the justice in that? Your father raped and murdered, Tom said quietly, thinking of Clara's letters and the evidence in Henry's files. He used blackmail and extortion to destroy innocent people. And you've continued his legacy by terrorizing families and stealing property that was never yours to begin with. The sound of voices echoed from the tunnel above. Law enforcement was arriving faster than anyone had expected. Sterling looked around the chamber desperately, searching for another exit or some way to escape with what he'd come for. There is no other way out, Tom said, reading Sterling's thoughts. Henry designed this place as a trap for people exactly like you. The only exit is through that tunnel, and it's probably full of police officers by now. Sterling's men were already moving toward the tunnel, abandoning their boss in favor of their own survival. But Sterling himself seemed frozen by the magnitude of his failure. He'd spent his entire life building toward this moment, and now it was slipping away from him. 40 years, he whispered. 40 years of searching, planning, waiting for the right opportunity. It can't end like this. It should have ended with your father's death, Tom said. Henry gave you decades to live with your stolen wealth and false reputation. That was more mercy than your family deserved. Sheriff Williams's voice called down from the tunnel entrance. Tom? Danny? Are you all right down there? We're fine, Tom called back, but we have Marcus Sterling and evidence of multiple crimes down here. As law enforcement officers filled the chamber, Tom felt a profound sense of completion. Henry's long game had finally reached its conclusion, and justice was being served exactly as he'd planned. The Sterling family's crimes would be exposed, their stolen wealth would be returned to its rightful owners, and Clara's legacy would live on through her grandson and great-grandson. But Tom also realized that their real adventure was just beginning. The fortune Henry had left them would provide security and opportunities they'd never dreamed of, but it would also bring responsibilities. They would need to honor Henry's memory and use their inheritance to help others who'd been victimized by people like the Sterlings. As they prepared to leave the chamber for the last time, Tom put his arm around Danny's shoulders. "So, buddy, what do you think about our treasure hunt now?" Danny looked around the chamber with wonder and satisfaction. "I think Great-Uncle Henry would be proud of us, Dad. We solved all his puzzles and caught the bad guys too." Tom smiled, thinking about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. They'd started as a desperate father and son looking for a free place to live, and they'd ended up uncovering a conspiracy that spanned generations. But most importantly, they'd discovered that they were part of a family legacy built on love, sacrifice, and the belief that truth would eventually triumph over injustice. The climb back through the tunnel felt like emerging from one life into another. Above ground, the mansion waited for them, no longer a crumbling burden, but a home where they could build their future together. The chamber erupted into controlled chaos as FBI agents, local police, and federal prosecutors descended into Henry's hidden vault. Tom and Danny were quickly moved to safety while investigators began the painstaking process of cataloging evidence that spanned decades of financial crimes. Special Agent Sarah Chen, the lead federal investigator, examined the Sterling Bank documents with obvious amazement. "Mr. Morrison, do you understand what you've uncovered here? This archive contains evidence of one of the largest embezzlement schemes in U.S. history." Tom watched as teams of specialists carefully removed documents, recordings, and artifacts from the vault. The massive key that had opened this final chamber lay on Henry's desk like a symbol of justice finally unlocked. "Agent Chen, what happens to Marcus Sterling now?" "He'll face federal charges for racketeering, conspiracy, and financial fraud based on his own actions over the past 20 years. But these documents also prove that dozens of families were victimized by his father's crimes. Some of those cases can still be prosecuted posthumously, which means stolen assets can be returned to survivors." Danny stood beside Tom, still clutching the chess piece that had been the final key to Henry's puzzle. "Are we in trouble for taking the treasure?" Agent Chen smiled at the boy's directness. "No, Danny. Everything your family found belongs to you legally. Henry Blackwood's will was properly executed, and this evidence proves that his wealth was accumulated legitimately. The Sterling family has no claim to any of it." As the investigation continued, Mrs. Henderson arrived with Sheriff Williams, carrying a thick folder of her own documents. Tom realized that the elderly woman had been Henry's co-conspirator all along, preserving evidence and waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. "Margaret Henderson," Agent Chen said with obvious respect, "we've been hoping to speak with you for hours." Mrs. Henderson nodded calmly. "I've been Henry's record keeper for 40 years, Agent Chen. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence in that vault, I helped him organize and preserve it all." She opened her folder to reveal additional bank records, correspondence, and legal documents that complemented the archive in Henry's vault. Henry knew that Marcus Sterling would never stop searching, never accept defeat. So we prepared for this day, the day when all the secrets would finally come to light. Tom felt a surge of gratitude toward the woman who'd been protecting their inheritance long before they'd arrived in Milbrook. "Mrs. Henderson, why didn't you tell us from the beginning?" Because Henry's plan required you to discover the truth for yourselves, she explained. If I'd simply handed you the evidence, you might not have understood its significance. But by following Henry's clues, by learning Clara's story, by understanding the sacrifices they made, you've become worthy guardians of their legacy. Marcus Sterling, meanwhile, sat in handcuffs while federal agents read him his rights. His expensive suit was rumpled, his carefully maintained composure completely shattered. As he was led away, he turned back to Tom with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "This isn't over, Morrison," he called out. "My family has resources you can't imagine. We'll fight this in court for decades if necessary." Agent Chen shook her head. "Mr. Sterling, with the evidence we've recovered today, your family's assets will be frozen, pending investigation. We're looking at RICO violations, money laundering, conspiracy charges. Your legal bills alone will bankrupt what's left of your empire." As Sterling disappeared up the tunnel under federal escort, Tom felt a profound sense of closure. The man who'd terrorized 3 generations of property owners had finally been held accountable for his crimes. But the day's revelations weren't finished. In the deepest recess of Henry's vault, investigators discovered a final cache of documents that changed everything Tom thought he knew about his family history. These papers contained proof that Clara's son, Tom's father, had been systematically denied his inheritance through Robert Sterling's manipulation of legal documents. Sterling had forged Clara's will, stolen trust funds meant for her child, and used intimidation to prevent anyone from questioning his actions. "Your father was the rightful heir to a substantial fortune," Agent Chen explained to Tom. "But Sterling made sure he never knew about it. The money went into offshore accounts that Marcus has been using to fund his harassment campaigns against property owners like you." Tom thought about his father, who died young from the stress of working multiple jobs to support his family. The man had never known that his real father was Henry Blackwood, or that he'd been cheated out of millions of dollars that could have provided security for generations. "How much money are we talking about?" Tom asked. Agent Chen consulted her preliminary calculations, including growth over 30 years, probably another $100 million. Plus the original Sterling assets that were stolen from the Blackwood partnership. "Your family is entitled to significant compensation." Danny tugged on Tom's sleeve. "Dad, does this mean we're really rich now?" Tom knelt down to his son's level, still struggling to process the magnitude of their inheritance. "It means we'll never have to worry about money again, buddy. But more importantly, it means we can help other people who've been hurt the way our family was hurt." As evening fell, the investigators began packing up evidence and preparing to seal the chamber, pending further legal proceedings. Tom and Danny were free to return to the mansion, but their lives had been fundamentally changed by the day's discoveries. Mrs. Henderson walked with them through the hidden passages, explaining more about Henry's long-term strategy. He could have exposed the Sterling crimes at any time over the past 40 years, she said. But he wanted to wait until Marcus had committed enough crimes of his own to ensure that justice would be complete. So he let Sterling get away with harassment and intimidation just to build a stronger case? Henry understood that the Sterling family's sense of entitlement would ultimately destroy them. Mrs. Henderson replied, "He knew that given enough time and opportunity, Marcus would become as corrupt as his father. Today proved he was right." As they emerged from the basement into the mansion's restored kitchen, Tom looked around at the home that had seemed like such a burden just weeks ago. Now it represented not just shelter, but legacy, a place where Clara and Henry's love story had been preserved, where justice had finally been served, and where Tom and Danny could build a future worthy of the sacrifices that had made it possible. The ornate key that had started their adventure lay on the kitchen table, no longer mysterious but somehow still magical. It had unlocked more than hidden chambers. It had unlocked the truth about their family, their history, and their place in a story that stretched back generations. "Mrs. Henderson," Tom said, "what do we do now?" The elderly woman smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd spent decades planning for this moment. "Now, Tom, you live the life Henry and Clara always wanted for their family. You use this gift to build something good, something lasting, and you remember that the real treasure was never the money, it was the love that preserved it for you." 2 weeks after Marcus Sterling's arrest, Tom found himself sitting in the vault chamber one final time before it was permanently sealed. In his hands was Clara's wedding ring, discovered in a small velvet box that had been Henry's most treasured possession. The ring was simple but elegant, a white gold band set with a modest diamond that caught the chamber's artificial light like captured starlight. But it was the note wrapped around the ring box that brought tears to Tom's eyes. "My dearest love," Clara had written in her careful script, "I know our time together must end, but please understand that you have given me something precious beyond measure, not just our son, but the knowledge that true love exists even when the world conspires against it. I return this ring not because I don't treasure it, but because I want you to give it someday to the woman who can love you openly, as you deserve to be loved. Our son will carry our love forward, even if he never knows our names. That is enough for me. That must be enough for both of us." Tom realized that Clara had given up everything, her marriage, her security, even her son, to protect the people she loved from scandal and ruin. Her sacrifice had preserved not just Henry's reputation, but their child's future, ensuring that he could grow up without the burden of his parents' forbidden love. But the note contained one final revelation that explained Henry's decades of careful planning. Clara had been pregnant again when she died, carrying Henry's second child. The car accident that killed her had also destroyed the family they might have built together, leaving Henry with only memories and an unshakable determination to honor her legacy. "She wanted you to have this," Mrs. Henderson said, entering the chamber with her own collection of Henry's belongings. "Henry told me that if anything happened to him, Clara's ring should go to the woman you chose to marry. He believed that love like theirs shouldn't end with death. It should inspire new love in future generations." Tom thought about the ring's significance, imagining the day when he might give it to someone who could love both him and Danny the way Clara had loved Henry and their son. The idea seemed both distant and hopeful, a promise that their family's story of love and sacrifice would continue. Mrs. Henderson sat beside Tom on the stone bench Henry had carved for quiet contemplation. "There's something else you should know about Clara's legacy. She established more than just a trust fund for her son. She created a foundation to help families in crisis, particularly single parents struggling to provide for their children." She handed Tom another set of documents, these showing that Clara's foundation had been quietly operating for 40 years. Funded by income from Henry's investments and managed by a network of trustees who'd never known the full story behind its creation. "The foundation has helped thousands of families over the decades," Mrs. Henderson explained. "Scholarship funds for children whose parents couldn't afford college, emergency assistance for families facing eviction or medical crisis, job training programs for single parents trying to build better lives. Clara's compassion has been touching lives long after her death." Tom studied the foundation's records, amazed by the scope of its charitable work. Clara and Henry's love story hadn't just been about personal happiness. It had been about creating something larger than themselves, a legacy of kindness that would outlast their own lives. "Mrs. Henderson, I want to expand the foundation, use part of our inheritance to help even more families. It's what Clara would have wanted, and it's what Henry spent his life working toward." Mrs. Henderson smiled with approval. "I hoped you'd say that." Henry left detailed plans for expanding the foundation's work, including partnerships with established charities and specific programs he thought would be most effective. As they prepared to leave the chamber for the final time, Agent Chen arrived with an update on the investigation into Marcus Sterling's crimes. The news was better than Tom had dared hope. "We've recovered assets worth over $300 million from Sterling family accounts," she reported. Most of it will be returned to victims of their embezzlement schemes, but a significant portion represents compensation owed to your family for decades of theft and harassment. The legal process would take time, but Tom's financial security was assured. More importantly, dozens of families who'd been victimized by Sterling's schemes would finally receive justice and compensation for their losses. But Agent Chen had more news. We've also arrested 3 of Sterling's associates who were involved in the harassment campaigns against property owners. Their testimony is helping us build cases against other wealthy families who've used similar tactics to steal property and assets from ordinary people. Tom realized that Henry's plan had accomplished something even greater than family justice. It had exposed a network of corruption that had been operating with impunity for decades. The evidence in Henry's vault was helping prosecutors build cases against criminals who'd thought they were untouchable. As they walked through the mansion's restored rooms, Tom marveled at how much had changed since that first day, when he'd reluctantly accepted a free house nobody wanted. The building that had seemed like a burden was now a sanctuary, a place where their family's history lived on in every restored detail. Danny ran ahead of them, his footsteps echoing through the grand hallway as he headed toward his tower room. The boy had adapted to their new circumstances with the resilience of childhood, but Tom could see that the experience had changed him too. Danny carried himself with new confidence, secure in the knowledge that he belonged to something larger than just their small family unit. "Dad," Danny called from the staircase, "can we keep the secret passages, even after the investigation is finished?" Tom laughed, imagining the adventures Danny would have exploring the mansion's hidden architecture. "I think we can arrange that, buddy. This house is full of secrets worth preserving." As evening settled over Milbrook, Tom stood on the mansion's front porch with Mrs. Henderson, watching the sun set behind the trees that lined their property. The house glowed warmly in the fading light, no longer mysterious or threatening, but welcoming and peaceful. "Henry would be proud of you," Mrs. Henderson said quietly. "You've honored his memory and Clara's sacrifice. You've proven that their love wasn't wasted, that it could inspire goodness in future generations." Tom thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment, from desperation and uncertainty to security and purpose. They'd gained more than money. They'd gained a sense of belonging to something meaningful, a family legacy built on love and justice rather than greed and corruption. The ornate key that had started their adventure was now displayed in a place of honor in Henry's study, a reminder of the mysteries they'd solved and the family they'd discovered. But Tom knew that their real treasure wasn't hidden in secret chambers or locked in vaults. Their treasure was the future they could build together, the lives they could touch through Clara's foundation, and the knowledge that love and sacrifice could triumph over greed and corruption. Clara's wedding ring would wait in Henry's safe until the day Tom found someone worthy of its legacy, someone who could understand that true wealth came not from what you accumulated, but from what you gave away in service to others. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Tom felt Henry and Clara's presence in the mansion they'd preserved for him. Their love story had ended in tragedy, but it had also created something beautiful, a family reunited, a wrong righted, and a legacy that would inspire goodness for generations to come. 6 months later, Tom stood in the mansion's restored garden, watching Danny play catch with a new baseball pristine white leather that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. The boy's throwing arm had improved dramatically since they'd moved to Milbrook, but more importantly, his confidence had blossomed along with their new life. The mansion itself had been transformed from a crumbling relic into a showcase of Victorian elegance. Tom had hired local craftsmen to complete the restoration, providing jobs for skilled workers who'd been struggling in the economic downturn. The house now served as both their family home and the headquarters for the expanded Clara Blackwood Foundation. Mrs. Henderson had moved into the mansion's guest wing, serving as the foundation's administrative coordinator and unofficial family historian. Her presence filled the house with warmth and wisdom, and she'd become the grandmother figure Danny had never known he needed. The foundation's impact had exceeded Tom's most optimistic projections. Using a portion of the recovered sterling assets, they'd established scholarship programs in 12 states, emergency assistance funds for families in crisis, and job training centers that specialized in helping single parents develop marketable skills. But perhaps most satisfying was the partnership they'd formed with local law enforcement to help other families who'd been victimized by property harassment schemes. The evidence from Henry's vault had inspired investigations across the country, leading to the recovery of millions in stolen assets and the prosecution of corrupt developers who'd been operating with impunity for decades. Tom had also fulfilled a promise to himself by starting Morrison Restoration, a construction company that specialized in preserving historic homes. The work combined his carpentry skills with his newfound appreciation for family legacy, and he'd quickly built a reputation for craftsmanship that honored both architectural heritage and modern comfort. Marcus Sterling, meanwhile, had been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to racketeering, conspiracy, and fraud charges. His business empire had been dismantled, with assets returned to victims of his family's crimes. The man who'd once seemed so powerful and threatening was now just another convicted criminal, his legacy of corruption finally exposed and punished. "Dad, catch!" Danny called, throwing the baseball in a perfect arc across the garden. Tom caught the ball easily, marveling at how natural this simple pleasure had become. For so many years, their lives had been dominated by financial stress and uncertainty. Now they had the luxury of spending entire afternoons playing catch, exploring the mansion's grounds, or simply enjoying each other's company without the constant worry about bills and survival. But their good fortune hadn't made them complacent. Tom had been careful to teach Danny about the responsibility that came with wealth, involving him in foundation decisions and showing him how their resources could help other families facing the challenges they'd once known intimately. "Mr. Morrison?" A voice called from the mansion's front porch. Tom turned to see Agent Chen approaching with a woman he didn't recognize, middle-aged, professionally dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Agent Chen, good to see you again. How can we help you?" "Tom, I'd like you to meet Dr. Rebecca Martinez, Director of the National Center for Financial Crime Investigation. She has a proposition that might interest you." Dr. Martinez stepped forward with a warm smile. "Mr. Morrison, we've been following the impact of your case on financial crime prosecution nationwide. The evidence you uncovered has helped us build cases against organized criminal networks we'd been investigating for years." Tom gestured toward the garden furniture, inviting his guests to sit. "I'm glad the evidence has been useful, but I'm not sure what more we can contribute." "Actually, we'd like to offer you a consulting position," Dr. Martinez explained. "Your experience with property harassment schemes, combined with your understanding of how criminals hide assets, makes you uniquely qualified to help other victims fight back against similar crimes." Tom was intrigued but cautious. "What would that involve?" "Primarily reviewing cases where families are being pressured to sell property under suspicious circumstances. You'd help us identify patterns of harassment and locate hidden assets that criminals might be trying to claim illegally. The work would be part-time, and you could do most of it from here." Agent Chen added, "Tom, we've discovered that the Sterling family's methods weren't unique. There are dozens of similar operations across the country, wealthy families using legal harassment and financial pressure to steal property from ordinary people. You could help us stop them." Tom thought about the families he could help, people facing the same kind of systematic intimidation he and Danny had experienced. The consulting work would give him a chance to turn their traumatic experience into something positive, using their knowledge to protect others from similar victimization. "Can I think about it?" Tom asked. "Of course," Dr. Martinez replied. Take all the time you need, but I hope you'll consider it. Your story has already inspired changes in how we investigate financial crimes. Your continued involvement could help us prevent similar cases from occurring." After his guests left, Tom found Mrs. Henderson in the foundation office, reviewing applications for emergency assistance grants. The elderly woman had thrown herself into the charitable work with remarkable energy, as if she'd been waiting her entire life for the opportunity to help others on this scale. "How many applications this week?" Tom asked. 47, Mrs. Henderson replied. "Single mothers, elderly people facing foreclosure, families dealing with medical emergencies. Each one represents real people in crisis, just like you and Danny were 6 months ago." Tom reviewed some of the applications, struck by how many of the stories echoed his own experiences. Financial emergencies, job losses, medical bills that exceeded insurance coverage. The foundation was addressing problems that could devastate any family, regardless of their previous stability. "Mrs. Henderson, I've been thinking about expanding our scope even further. What if we created a legal defense fund specifically for families facing property harassment? We could provide them with the kind of legal representation that people like Sterling use against ordinary families." Mrs. Henderson's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Henry would love that idea. He always believed that justice should be available to everyone, not just those who could afford expensive lawyers. That evening, Tom sat in Henry's study, reading through the great-uncle's journal one more time. The leather-bound book had become his source of wisdom and inspiration, a guide for navigating the responsibilities that came with their inheritance. "The measure of a man's worth," Henry had written, "is not what he accumulates for himself, but what he preserves for future generations. Wealth that serves only its owner becomes worthless upon his death, but wealth that serves humanity becomes immortal." Tom understood now why Henry had designed such an elaborate treasure hunt. The puzzles and challenges hadn't just been tests of intelligence or persistence, they'd been lessons in the values that should guide their use of the inherited fortune. Henry had wanted to ensure that his wealth would go to someone who understood the difference between having money and being worthy of it. Danny appeared in the study doorway, still carrying his baseball and glowing with the satisfaction of a day spent in simple pleasures. "Dad, Mrs. Henderson says dinner's ready. She made that pot roast you like." Tom smiled, struck by how completely their lives had been transformed. 6 months ago, they'd been surviving on whatever meals Mrs. Henderson had brought them out of kindness. Now they were a real family, gathered around their own dinner table in their own home, discussing plans to help other families achieve similar stability. "Danny, before we go eat, I want to ask you something. How would you feel if I took a job helping other families who are being bullied by people like Marcus Sterling?" Danny considered the question with the seriousness he'd developed since their adventure began. "Would it help people like us? People who don't have enough money to fight back?" "Yes, exactly like that." "Then I think you should do it," Danny said decisively. "Great-Uncle Henry and Clara would want us to help people, right?" Tom felt a surge of pride in his son's instinctive understanding of their responsibilities. Danny had learned the right lessons from their experience, that privilege came with obligations, that strength should be used to protect the vulnerable, and that family meant more than just blood relations. As they walked toward the dining room together, Tom caught sight of Clara's portrait in the front hall. The painted woman seemed to smile with approval, as if she understood that her sacrifice had ultimately created something beautiful, a family reunited, a wrong righted, and a legacy of compassion that would outlast them all. The mansion's dinner table, once covered with dust and neglect, now held Mrs. Henderson's pot roast, fresh vegetables from their restored garden, and the easy conversation of people who'd found their place in the world. Danny chattered about his plans for a treehouse in the oak tree behind the house, while Mrs. Henderson discussed foundation business and shared stories about Henry and Clara's younger days. Tom listened to the comfortable sounds of family life and realized that this was Henry's greatest gift, not the money or the house or even the justice they'd achieved, but the knowledge that love could triumph over greed, that sacrifice could inspire goodness, and that family bonds could endure across generations and beyond death itself. After dinner, Tom tucked Danny into bed in the tower room, now decorated with posters of baseball players and model airplanes. But the star map on the ceiling remained unchanged, a reminder of the night they'd first discovered the mansion's secrets. "Dad," Danny said sleepily, "do you think Great-Uncle Henry and Clara are happy now about what we did?" Tom looked up at the painted stars, imagining the two lovers who'd sacrificed so much to preserve something precious for future generations. "I think they're very happy, buddy. I think they're proud that their love created something good in the world." As Tom turned off the lights and headed downstairs, he felt their presence in the mansion they'd preserved for him not as ghosts or memories, but as living inspiration for the choices he would make and the legacy he would build for Danny and the generations that would follow. The ornate key that had started their adventure sat on Henry's desk, no longer mysterious but still magical, a symbol of the doors that love could open and the treasures that patience could uncover. Outside, the mansion's grounds stretched under starlight, peaceful and secure, home to a family that had learned the difference between having everything and being truly rich. Their treasure hunt was over, but their real adventure, building a life worthy of the love that had preserved it for them, was just beginning.